it kind of by happenstance, and it happened to coincide with how my thoughts have been running lately, having to do with the nature of consciousness itself, as far as where it comes from, what it is, all those types of inquiries that sometimes come about, and started looking into physics and things like that to try to help explain it, and stumbled onto Stuart Hameroff's work with Roger Penrose, and started to conceptualize this whole thing with quantum physics as a cornerstone. And then was really intrigued by the idea of a 2D surface and the holographic effect as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And since I'm speaking on that, would you mind, maybe I could get a better grasp on it, just the holographic effect at all, and how you came to this conclusion overall?
Okay, so look, it started some time ago. I'm a medical doctor and I have a family practice, and I've been doing family medicine since the early 80s. Mm-hmm. And in the first year of doing family medicine, one of my medical partners was doing acupuncture, and I was quite intrigued. And very sadly, at the age of 42, he died that year. And so I had heard some great stuff about acupuncture, so I started to look at it. And I'd already had quite an interest in Eastern philosophy. And so to cut a long story short, I started to do acupuncture and study probably in depth Chinese medicine, and it's actually more its Taoist than its Maoist roots, to a point that I was using it regularly on people coming to see me with the most complex issues to try to sort out the patterns in their lives. I'll come to that in a minute. I started to listen to the patterns that people were explaining to me about their lives and their illnesses. Interesting thing about patterns is that basically with acupuncture, you hear a pattern and you respond to the body with a pattern, almost like a constellation, jumping a few things, but that's intrigued me. And there are a number of us here, doctors in New Zealand, who became intrigued, not just to use it within the medical paradigm, but to actually explore the paradigm that it was intended for and how it developed from Eastern philosophical thought. Particularly, the patterns of illness, the link between our emotions and our physical state. And so one of, I suppose, the overriding principle is that the thought that the universe as above corresponds to what happens within us. That we are somehow connected to nature and the world around us. In fact, if acupuncture, you're basically pricking the skin and enhancing those connections to the environment around us. So we have to be careful when we're giving acupuncture that we create a peaceful environment, and because we can transmit that to the person. I also noticed a huge amount of sensitivity, range of sensitivity in the people coming to see me. So the bottom line was that was my practical experience of as above, so below. But also, there was this strange thing of what we call the microsystems, ear acupuncture, where you could use small versions of the body, small organs, and they would tell you, you'll be able to treat the whole body to a certain extent through a very small part. And so I became intrigued with that whole holographic principle that the whole could be somehow included in the smallest part. Very much like, let's say, as above, this vast universe, somehow we could be conduits to that, sort of receivers of that, and so, that was, so it was actually through ear acupuncture that I started to become very intrigued, because it would seem to be that if I put a pin in a certain part of the ear, it did seem to respond to that particular part of the body. So here, the neck, or here, the low back.
Okay.
And it seemed to give rather instant improvement. So of course, I'm in a very conservative profession, and therefore I I was sort of somewhat bombarded by my colleagues saying, have you gone mad? This is crazy. And I said, well, it seems to be safe and it works and people like it. But they said, well, it couldn't be science. So it sent me on a journey of trying to, I suppose, investigate the science of what I was seeing. Was there any scientific valid basis for this? And also, over the next 10 years, I became intrigued with Ayurvedic science and this concept of chakras, where I got exactly the same response from my profession saying, what are you going into this for? It's bad enough you're doing acupuncture. Why are you starting talking about the chakras and everything? And I said, well, it sort of fits with what people are saying. For instance, if they're getting problems at the work and they're getting a bellyache or they're getting too much acid, often they're trapped in the middle somewhere. And I found that explaining that to people was easier than explaining the meridians, which you needed to study, if you like. But everybody can understand, where they're getting their gut ache. And you could start then have an opening point to discuss what else is happening in their lives, rather than just a medication which will help the symptoms, but not necessarily unravel the complexity of their lives. So it gives us an opening for that to happen. So that led me to then start writing a few books about it, saying how I saw it, and how I saw there were possible links not only to ancient philosophies, which I'm still intrigued by, and I suppose how health has been regarded over the centuries in traditional cultures, but also in this sort of emerging understanding of physics, quantum physics, and with my take on it, almost as a naive observer, because and so I became intrigued. So my first book was called Healing Ways, and it was this sort of how you can combine Western medicine and Eastern medicine. Then I wrote a book called The Human Antenna, because it would seem to be that we are receivers of information. I would see that our brains are filters and receivers, and it seems to be that when we're in that sort of relaxed, more meditative state in the zone, that we can become more at peace, possibly more creative. And that our journey in life may be to increase in wisdom and consciousness as we get older. But then the next step, was the big step, was saying, well, this still seems to be some duality, that we are here and all this consciousness is out there and we're absorbing it. What if we were the emblems of consciousness? We were somehow linked, not just in this linear connective way, but actually in a holographic way with the universe, the holographic concept of a universe. And around the early noughties, I suppose, there were quite a few articles came out, Scientific American, for instance, who talked about this. This reality that we see, feel, and touch with our senses, the real story? Are we actually dealing with a holographic universe where our senses are converting this reality into our 3 and 4D reality? But they still had the person on the cover, the human, walking through this other reality. So I tried to take it to the next weird step, is no, we're part of it. If we're, if a reality is there for overlapping beams of energy or whatever, or of information, then we're part of that as well. What does that mean? Let's explore that to see if it makes any sense. I wrote this about 12 years ago. So when you contacted me, I had to start reading it again, because there's a lot of science in it that I thought, he's going to ask me about this. He's going to ask me about some Bose-Einstein. and so I hesitate if all that science I wrote about, I'll have to check again. I've also spent the last day looking at some updates of things, but I think probably it's more interesting as how I got to that, because I'd have to say people can read the book. It's for the more detailed stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
I hope that's okay by you.
Yes, absolutely. That's what I was going to tell you, is I'm not going to make you have to remember all the science that you recounted by any means. In fact, it's the narrative behind the story how you got there that I was mostly curious about, because I kind of arrived at it intuitively or instinctually, sort of. So I kind of wanted to parallel that to yours and see how you arrived ultimately.
Yeah, but like you, it was very practical. Also, I started to meditate, and once you got a deeper understanding of Western philosophy, I started practicing Qigong and various other things. And I found that the creative side of me blossomed in the 90s, and I started because I started to write songs and start poetry and things. And I thought, this is interesting. All this is happening because by getting into this mode. So, and I also noticed that in my practice, I'm usually trying to discover the creative drive or element of the person in front of me, because so much that has been conditioned out of it. People say, well, like, I'm not creative, I'm not right. I said, you are creative in your own specific way, probably a unique way, because once they're coming and once they start, I suppose, experiencing a oneness, if you like, which can sometimes happen with acupuncture, but often with their own practices, that they do rediscover a deeper meaning in life, and dare I say, a soul, which is unique, but also has a unique expression. So, and that parallels a deep improvement of health and meaning in their lives. So it was mirroring in my life too.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's neat to see how you did it kind of through that mechanism. And that's what I've noticed as well, engaging in the Eastern practices that get you in the zone of proximal development, things like that. You start to spark those creative drives, and also these inquiries kind of start coming to you as well. They kind of arrive intuitively or instinctually as you go through these practices. And I began to question the nature of consciousness, as in what pertains or what pervades us, our own subjectivity in the world. What gives us that by which we see the world differently than someone else? Why would different feelings invoke in me, and when I see the color red, and you would see the color red, and something alternative to that would arise? That to me seems that becomes the hard problem of consciousness, as they termed it, and becomes an unanswerable enigma. So when we're framing this holographic model and how you see medicine overall, when you administer it this way, what do you see its implications of being on consciousness? Do you see consciousness is kind of talked about as being an emergent phenomenon? Some people claim it's an epiphenomenon. Sometimes people claim it's an illusion overall. So in your opinion, this holographic model too, beyond medicine, what are the implications it has upon the overall consciousness? Do you see consciousness as a field that kind of we receive as an antenna? I assume that is kind of what you were saying earlier.
Yeah, I think that still stands, that somehow we are a filter for consciousness. I think, even you'll find if you meditate or you get into the zone or you're happy or laughing, I mean, it doesn't have to be heavy stuff at all. It can be, that is when you're feeling, you lose track of time, basically, when you're enjoying something, you're in the zone, and you're not looking at your time. So somehow you're escaping time constraints. It's not only when we're more I suppose creative, but it's also when we're more at peace and happy. So I thought that was a great aim for people coming to see me, to try and first of all get them to sample that themselves, by themselves, get to a space where I think, gosh, I can do this without my medication, I can do this on my own, because as I say, with acupuncture, you can get into a very relaxed sort of state, putting pins basically around the body and in some specific areas, can get them to a space of peace and relaxation, a sort of lightness of being. I suppose I'm digressing, but I just say, well, the process is there. And then when they say, well, what shall I look out for now? And if they are in this slightly altered state, and I say, just look out for synchronicities in your life. Just be aware of those fun things that may mean a lot to you. The song you're thinking about that appears on the radio 2 minutes later, or the person who you're thinking about phones you, or it's just something like that. Then that's the sort of thing that will sort of suggest to me you're on the right track, because you're responding as if you were part of your environment, somehow supported by it, somehow contributing to it. And, you know, so I would sort of have to define my ideas of health, that it's not just not being sick, it's actually being in this state. But as you know, you can't stay in the state all the time. After being in acupuncture, you'll go home and you'll drive your car, but you've got to realize that, you know, there's still dangers on the warp road. So you have to be in this world, but also at times be able to step outside it, a bit like Plato's Platonic cave, where you go back we have to go back into that reality, even to help people, but also to enjoy it, but also to have a feeling that there's something beyond. And when you have that feeling of something beyond, it's deeply satisfying, and it also reduces fear of unnatural fear of death. Obviously, we have a fear of death, but we start thinking, well, I wonder if this thing that I'm connecting to is outside not only our physical existence here, but our life and death here too. Yeah. So one thing it came through, and obviously I'm here as a doctor to save lives, and I don't do this if I'm having to resuscitate somebody with CPR in an ER room. But the big issue has been to be alert, but not to reduce fear down, unnatural fear. And you know, we can see what's happened in the world the last 2 years, where we've been overcome by fear. And therefore, being in this state, being able to access this state of being becomes essential, I think, in modern day life. For me, it has anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. It provides a mechanism, at least for a second, to feel that inner peace that exists kind of all the time. With meditative practices and things like that, you can kind of get a moment of reprieve, so to speak, unlike much other. And it is a practice, I suppose, and that's kind of how I view it. As you engage in it and as you go through meditation, you start to feel these oneness, and that's kind of panpsychism is kind of what they call it, at least a lot of times when they speak of the fundamental reality being a field of conscious awareness that we all participate in. And it kind of is in line with the idea in geometry of fractals, where you have the smaller part of a whole making up. It's almost like that in life. And I was going to ask you about that. When you look at anything like it, whether it be a car, whether it be a table, if you look at a table, it's got 4 legs, but one leg really doesn't serve a purpose without the other 3. So you really don't have, you know, and then you look at a car and you've got 8 systems that work. You got a cooling system, you've got, you know, an exhaust system, you've got an electronics system, and they're all, one by itself is useless, but when paired with multiple, then you look at a car and you see a car. You don't see it for all of its parts. And so it would make sense that each one of those parts would be of equal value, but they wouldn't be of as much value unless they were pieced together to form a car, so to speak.
Yes. Yeah, and look, you'll know what a car, maybe a Maserati, looks like or so, but each Maserati is different. So I never owned a Maserati, by the way.
Yeah,
I wouldn't do that. But basically, if you had one, you'd say, this is my Maserati. It's a special Maserati. It's not like, you know, it's like it's mine. So you will find something extra special about that Maserati. To everybody else, it looks the same as us. You know, we're humans. We can sort of tell we're humans, but we're all individual. You can tell somebody's face, you know, out of millions of faces that are probably only minutely different. So this whole idea of, you know, the property of a hologram is that, you know, the smallest parts contain all the parts, if you like. But in fractals, of course, you get this as Mandelbrot set, where you've got this continuing development, and each part has a slight individual variation on the theme, just like you know, every fly is different, every snowflake is different. Everything has that, you know, every Maserati is slightly different. Everything has that slight difference. So yes, you see that, but it also happens in vignettes in our lives, you know, so little dramas that we go through. As Leonard Cohen said, the bitching in every kitchen, you know, that actually is a small version of what's happening globally, you know. So it's very humbling, I think, to see life this way. But then you can see, you can see it in trees. You see it everywhere in nature. Every leaf, that's slightly different. And to me, with this awareness, everything becomes quite a wonder, doesn't it? Everything becomes wonderful, and yeah. So I would totally agree. The sum of the parts, absolutely. What does a band do? Like the Beatles, it's got these individual parts, but it needed all those 4 characters and their different skills and personalities to create great music. So that's exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah,
life ain't linear. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the analogy of music works extremely well here too. Philosophically, you can apply it in a way, because when you have a group, when you have a symphony playing, or you have an orchestra playing, and you have a conductor of that orchestra, and everybody's playing in harmonious, resonance with each other, you can view the world as such as that. So if you want to be an active participant in that orchestra, the more you actively participate, the more you are on key, the more that you are on tempo, the more you're going to resonate with the rest of the musicians and create a more melodic tune, a melodic sound. And the way in which we engage with our instruments in the world allows us to more fully resonate potentially with what this musical field is. And ultimately, we may all be seeking the conductor, which would be the creator, the God, however you seek that. But I tend to think of it more like jazz. Potentially, maybe there is no conductor, but at least there's still a harmony there.
Yeah, in jazz, you've got this free flow of consciousness. It's just totally fascinating. And you can see something approaching entanglement of humans, and
yes,
that predictive, what's going to happen next. Yeah, no, I love that. I love free flow jazz, but also the connection with the audience is important, and you become within this harmony. You become this organism, if you like, all sort of focused, but also with a certain amount of freedom. Of course, you can get hypnotized by certain things, but I'm talking about, I suppose, another level that happens when you've got the audience, you've got the players, you've got the conductor, everybody working in sync. You can absolutely, you observe it there. And say somebody's playing a symphony or a Beethoven symphony, they're going to play it slightly different each time. That's the fractal element to it. In fact, it needs to be slightly different. It needs to add human variation. It must never be the same again. Russ, you'd never go back to listen to the thing again, would you? You'd always want to see something different.
You see that human element mixed into it, where when it's not this copy and paste replica, it's the human element, where whenever a guitarist solos in a song, a lot of times that will be uniquely different each time. And that to me kind of demonstrates the uniqueness of life, because like you said, when you have the audience and you have the band member on stage and you have the guitar solo playing, he's tap dancing, as I'm quoting somebody else, but kind of tap dancing on between order and chaos, right there on the edge of what could sound completely horrible and completely off key and could go awry quickly, but it stays right there on that border between what could be ultimately chaos, but what ultimately isn't. It's this bridge between the chorus and the next verse, and it's this harmonious connection between these musicians, and then the audience participates in that, and it's almost like you have this joint bidirectional oneness that's being felt. It's almost a proponent of, it's kind of inducing a state of oneness, a meditative state where people get outside of themselves, which is kind of the only way you can explain some of the guitar solos you see. You can't explain that as being the ego of the person really trying to get their skill set in tune. It's more so this automaticity that comes through them, it seems like.
Yeah, I'm a musician as well, or a songwriter, but I've just finished an album. I'm only mentioning this because I'm working with a great guitarist. I mean, Nigel Gavin is from New York, but this guy is phenomenal, and I was so lucky to have him. And he produced a couple of guitar solos, which we did in one take. And we didn't want to do it next time. It was just so phenomenal. And it wasn't, to me, it's pretty perfect, but it wasn't about perfection. Timing is absolutely perfect. It was like wow, that just happened at the moment. It will never be
Yeah.
necessarily repeated. And I'm in awe of that. I mean, when I look at classical music, there's Mahler's Ninth, which there's a part in Nine Sounds is about 28 minutes or so.
Yeah.
Which I listen to a lot during a difficult time, because 27 minutes is quite good as a sort of meditative exercise. And this was what Mahler wrote this. I think it was part of Death in Venice, which is, you know, the movie.
Yeah.
It was based on this, but actually Mahler knew he was dying at this stage. And it goes through all the consternation of fear of dying, the chaos, and without being a spoiler, eventually to a state of an amazing peace. And you have to hear this live, because the recording I've got is live, because it goes and just fades like this to nothing. And the audience will take 30 to 40 seconds before they respond. They're totally in that
the trance state.
And it's an amazing meditation, because it brings you through, if you're feeling a bit of fear, it brings you through this to resolution. Then fear comes back again, and then it comes down.
Yeah.
And then eventually, and it's sort of Mahlerish, because it's a bit, and then it's just like a thread, and then it dissipates, and then people are in this mode, and one person start clapping. It's the most amazing experience. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mahler's Ninth. I don't know if you've done that, but meditate to Mahler's Ninth. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And to bring this back kind of a little bit to consciousness, just quickly, the way consciousness is framed a lot of times in a physicalist viewpoint is that we have one region of the brain, and when it activates, that elicits a certain emotion, and it does this repeatedly every time. And we obviously can now tell with neuroimaging and the use of meditation now that we study meditation and we study psychedelics and things like that, we can see that the brain ultimately is very unique. This modular version of the brain that we're used to, with the temporal lobe and the occipital lobe, we're seeing, from what I understand at least, and from some of the people I've talked with, is this dynamic model of the brain emerging, this kind of network module, where you've got, there's that phrase, nerves that wire together, fire together, wire together. And that's kind of what we see in neurogenesis is, or at least from my understanding, is that certain regions of the brain can grow, repair, and adapt following damage or just trauma or emotional distress or whatever may be the case. And we can see different parts of the brain activating to produce the same states of being. So at least it shows us that there's not this static, stoic, one-for-one between the brain and this part of the brain's activated, therefore I feel anxiety. It's not so much that. And the reason I bring this up is because these emotions that we feel, especially the unique platonic emotions like love and virtue, this ultimate holographic model of medicine and the holographic model of consciousness would, if I'm correct, or at least how you see it, would that describe these values as almost being encoded into information within this 2D sphere being?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, I mean, word consciousness is really difficult, the hard problem, as David Chalmers will talk about. I suppose what I've talked about is a consciousness and that exists when we quieten our minds and our thinking. It's not just that beta consciousness of thinking. It's actually a far greater connection to a universal consciousness, and I'm sort of explaining that with what I'm doing. And the brain is it's amazing. It's our connector to this consciousness, but it also is our essential, obviously, for the workings of our body. I might say that's but it's not, as I say, it's not as tied down as you think. The visual cortex at the back there. The evidence is that some of our sight is processed in all around, so that there's interconnections, almost holonomic connections, sort of everywhere. The model you mentioned of the Hameroff and Penrose model is that there's another system in the body of microtubules. And to step back, this is what I think we're tapping into with massage and acupuncture. There's a network, and it's actually been labeled in the last few years called the interstitium. They've had to discover what they say is some of the scientists say it's the biggest organ in the body, which is basically connective tissue that's connecting everywhere. And you can say that the meridians are part of this, are the representation of the interstitium. And it's interesting, they've never been able to find this before, because the way we've been looking at the body is to cut bits out, and which are generally dead, then fix them in formalin and look at what dead tissue looks like. Whereas this has been discovered through laser technology and everything, of actually looking at actually what's happening in the body. So you've got this network, which is fluid-filled interstitium of connective tissue, protein, and fluid and water, which basically connects everything in the body. Therefore, it is our connective tissue, and it runs into every cell of the body. So if you look at how a cell divides, you've got these
spindles,
strands, pulling. And when I was in medical school, I said, well, what's doing that? You know, what forces are doing? I say, shut up, Robin, get on with it. It just does. Okay. Now, in the brain, of course, there isn't so much of that going on. So these microtubules have a different function. And the Hameroff-Penrose model surmises that they're foundries where the quantum world, or this other field, if you like, of consciousness collapses down into something that we can sort out here. So therefore, we make sense of it with our senses. Therefore, it is the foundries of our consciousness. And so whether that appealed to me.
It appealed to me too.
And, you know, for people to say, how do you know that? You say, well, no, it just seems to make sense. Even if it's a metaphor, it seems to fit. And also from the practicalities of what I'm doing, it seems to be the reason why some people in these slightly altered states, whether that's, you know, when they're relaxed or they've meditated or they've listened to music, can sometimes feel a joy of being part of some universal field. And they don't feel so separated from each other, and therefore, you know, you escape fear. So that seems to make sense. So this is the network, and I surmise that this is our true connective tissue, and that our hearts and our lungs are supporting the connective tissue rather than the connective tissue just supporting everything else. They're actually in some sort of harmony with each other. And that interstitium has become a subject of great debate. Of course, there are skeptics who say, you know, it's rubbish, but I don't think you can approach this without some practical experience of that. You know, if it actually makes sense practically through my experience, then to me it adds, and it helps when I'm explaining this to somebody who's undergoing some sort of therapy or treatment, that this is this other part of you. And is it amazing that we haven't learned about this in our schools, in our universities?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it makes intuitive, coherent sense, even not even with an academic understanding of these things so much, but with a mere familiarity a little bit with these conceptual ideas of quantum physics, where we, like you were mentioning earlier, entanglement, which means what we mean by or what academia means by entanglement is, from my understanding, the spooky action at a distance, as Einstein would call it, where you've got a proton that's been associated with an antiproton, or a positron. And when these are, no matter if they're from one end of the universe to the other end of the universe, when one moves, the other moves with instantaneity. I mean, it's rapidly, it's faster than the speed of light. They're entangled for their light. We've observed this. And so we know that these two particles, when they come into existence, and they, no matter how far away, they move instantaneously with each other, which is a wild phenomenon. I mean, it's unexplainable.
So they escape time, and they escape, well, space and time. So they're non-temporal too. And that was good. I've just checked my book, how I explain that by looking at a painting where everything coexists. It's like the painting, it's not that corner somehow causes that other corner. Great art causes that coming together. Or experience at a concert, for instance, that's a coming together. It's not just a part. So there's I would see entanglement in great art. I would see entanglement. I see it in love. because, you know,
Yeah.
you're going to, if somebody goes to another country, you don't love them any less. And when they die, you don't love them any less. In fact, you know, I say that human entanglement may form on the wings of love. That sounds a bit, yeah.
No, I think that that's beautiful.
You know,
I think that's probably true, to tell you the truth. I think platonic values, like, I think love is probably the ultimate virtue of them all.
Yeah.
It seems to be, anyways. It binds it all together. There has to be some glue holding this information together. When you engage in acts like love, and when you feel those virtuosities, that's when you start to notice even more these patternistic archetypal things that occur in your life. You were mentioning synchronicities when you think of a song, hear it, or when you were thinking of what you were going to make for dinner tonight, you go to the supermarket and it's on sale, whatever. You know, something just as small as that, or maybe larger. When they happen repeatedly over and over again, you notice those more when you start to engage more in loving, virtuous acts. It seems to me, like you mentioned in your book, you have the analogy, if you wouldn't mind maybe explaining, if you can recall, it's the idea of when you pet a dog, a puppy, and you're contributing virtue to that field. The dog is satisfied, the human being is receiving love from the dog's receiving love from you. When that happens, you're engaging in a virtuous act, and therefore maybe you're more prone afterwards to observe synchronicity or something like that, because you're contributing to this field some type of energy.
Yeah, and it's a very simple example, and I do that at the beginning of this. That's the healing model that I base it on, is stroking the dog, because again, you're responding in a very sensitive way. You're not putting a lot of overthinking into it, and you're benefiting from, the dog's benefiting from it, and you know, this is why animals are so amazing for us, and how dogs and cats are great companions in different ways. And I sort of take that into, say, the same with a baby. You know, everybody loves a baby, you cuddle the baby, and that we can feel that oneness. You know, they're just bundles of energy, and but we have to be very delicate with them. And then with children, but as the children then grow up and become teenagers, we're challenged. Okay.
Yeah, then you can start slapping them around a little bit.
We love them to bits, but you know, the negotiation happens.
Yeah,
and that's the vignette of healing, because you know, people come often in a state of fear to a doctor. So they come as a child, and they're looking at an adult to sort of try, it doesn't matter what age they are, to try and sort of rectify their problems. But as they go through that healing process, they become the adult through this process, and then they set off into the world, and with any luck, they become the healers of others. So because they have experienced something, and that's just as a model of healing, if you like, that seems to make sense to me. And I noticed, and somehow I've aligned that with that holographic model, because it's like a patterning. It's a patterning that we can see quickly that happens, or can take a whole lifetime to heal from those sort of patterning. Yeah,
and you're sorry, I don't know why I couldn't say that. What I was trying to say is, the healing process isn't linear by any means. I don't think that and it's certainly unique to each individual. I think that pursuing, at least for my sake or my own situation, it seemed like meditative practices, Tai Chi, things like that, and getting into that zone of proximal development and being in that state is ultimately critical to the healing that has to take place. And I know that's like that broad, that claim carries a bold weight to it, especially from somebody like me who is very simple-minded. But I think that those practices are integral, because they force this resurfacing of what you have to see. So this trauma, when we talk about time, we talk about consciousness, and the embedded within this conscious field is the values of virtue. Well, also is our past, and also is our future. And facing that is hard to do, to see it for what it really truly is, without being in a non-egoic, very frazzled mind. You can't ever be centered enough to say, this is me, this is the one, that I'm part of this whole thing. That can be a healing experience in itself, because then you realize that no matter what storms you've walked through in the past, there's still a rainbow over. There's been a rainbow over your head that entire path you've been walking through that, and there's been an umbrella there. You probably don't need it anymore. Kind of thing is, and that's a song that I'm quoting kind of, but it just stuck with me so much to see that a lot, especially with psychedelic experiences, you see a lot of reports of people of this traumatic catharsis occurring, this almost vitally necessary catharsis. Where I talked to a gentleman, Dr. James Cook, he works at Oxford University, and he actually studies psychedelics, and he had a shamanic experience with ayahuasca, and he was able he had this visual experience with an actual shaman who administered it in a ceremonial way, and actually saw himself as a baby and saw the abuse, the narcissistic tendencies of his parents and his abandonment, and saw himself be kind of reborn cathartically and visionarily, and had this shaman singing to him at the same time as this was occurring. And this may sound a little woo-woo, but this was his experience. It's very incredible. And so what happened after that, he said he was able to, after 20 something years, he was able to say, I get the source now, the source of the pain, the source of the problem, the ultimate, really the part that's interwoven into the fabric of your being that causes all these illnesses, that causes all these pain. You have to go back and somehow see that. Maybe that's why these shamanic practices featured meditation, featured psychedelics and things like that, potentially.
Yeah, I think there's a huge move, and it's great that research is being done. It's, in the 70s, it could have gone that way. But obviously you'd had, the history of acid trips and Timothy Leary and others, and it become controversial. It was almost as if that sort of acid tripping was too mixed up with our own egos, and we were too impatient to get it going. And now I think, and of course it could have gone that way, rather than the psychotropic drugs and the antidepressants and all that, which have been very beneficial for the drug companies, but maybe hasn't got to the roots of what's happening. And in that shamanic experience, ayahuasca is amazing because it's the use of two herbs which individually don't do anything else, and how they discovered this is the only two herbs that do this, in ayahuasca. Anyway, the story of ayahuasca is amazing. But I mean, what happens is, I think people step out of this reality, and they step outside of their bodies, and they're able to look at themselves, and they're in context with the world, and that's how the healing occurs. And you see the same with people who have out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences. They see themselves within this world, and it's not that somehow that gives them clarity, and they come back. But the important thing, I think, with that shamanic experience is that it's done with a cushion of compassion. It can be tough love, because if it's done within that tribal love, if you like, caring, elders, then it works. The dangers are if it's done not in that environment. Exactly. I don't know if we've grown up enough. I think we've just at a stage where we're beginning to realize that it's that environment that's so important to nurture the people through. And when I see the stuff that's being done in the universities, I think they get that. I think they are very supportive of what the person's going through. And because of that, it's been magnificent at healing, opioid addictions and things which we've struggled with. and a lot of my work involves very deep trauma. But pretty well, we've all got trauma in us. So this isn't something.
This isn't unique to anybody's story. Sure.
And so again, understanding that trauma, healing from that trauma is amazing. There are some techniques that I can use that come close to it. I don't know if I'd be good with ayahuasca. You have to wear diapers sometimes, and I get seasick in the bath, so I'm not sure if, I haven't been attracted to it. I'd like to do it some other way, but, good for them. But also, when people do go off to South America, I say to them, make sure that, you're going to a good place, because there are a lot of charlatans and out there, but when it's good, it's very, very good, and when it's bad, it's not so good.
Absolutely.
So I think this is the sort of the way forward. A bit about meaning, just one thing that occurred to me. I deal with a lot of young people, young males, and in New Zealand here, you've got this horrific youth suicide, these figures, you know, where we've got this very high suicide rate, particularly in young men, also in young women. And somehow I became interested in transgenerational trauma, you know, how much of the trauma of our parents and grandparents that hasn't been dealt with on certain levels do we inherit, and how much, and somehow that insight helps them, you know, especially they look back, say, at the trenches, the First World War, where their great-great-grandfathers or beyond were there. They were facing these terrors at this pretty well the same time as the people that I'm seeing. And somehow has that, what they're going through, what these young people are going through now, somehow involved in the healing of that trauma. And what this does is it also broadens it, so that gives meaning to their suffering. And I say, well, just possibly imagine all your ancestors are there. They've had this trauma over hundreds, even thousands of years, are just around us now, willing you on, saying, yeah, you get through this, you're healing for us. Somehow you are clearing something very deep. And because this is an existential crisis for most people, it's like, why are we here? Why? And it gives another meaning to them. It gives a purpose to them, which seems to be very healing. And it sort of makes sense. So there again, extending these principles into real practical ways like that is something that you know, I've continued to try over the years.
Yeah, no, that's kind of beautifully said, really. I never really had thought of the phenomena of transgenerational trauma. I guess because when you're thinking in scientific terms, it's hard to understand the genetics behind that. And when we're thinking just too concrete, of course, if you can elevate past the scientific aspect of genetics and think of potential transgenerational trauma, that's an interesting term. And to me, it's very probably true, because how could it not be? Because ultimately, say your parent was traumatically, you know, had a trauma that was never dealt with. And even if it wasn't passed on to you genetically, of course, or something, it's going to be passed on in the way that you're nurtured. So your environmental expression of genes, epigenetics, study of that,
exactly.
That's going to be what's key to here. Whenever we look at the genome of the human and we see, like, we used to think 90% junk DNA, as if that made any sense. Anyways, now we see the activation and deactivation of these different codons, these different sections within that.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, if your parent was traumatic, had this trauma that was never dealt with, the way they nurture your environment around you is going to be directly related to the non-tending to that trauma. So it's going to cause gene expression probably to be out of whack, ultimately passing on trauma to the person, you know, next generation.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a study done on great-great-grandkids of Holocaust survivors, and they have nightmares, you know, that are linked to that. And I just, so, I mean, that's, and there's a lot of this stuff emerging in the literature. Even if you just a slight tangent is smoking, cigarette smoking, which was very much used in traumatic situations in battle. People were handed out cigarettes. Now, over the last 20, 30 years, in general, there's been a weaning off of that support, which is basically a lung support. The Chinese would say nicotine is a somehow a lung support. It is. And the lung is involved with grief. So we've seen over the last 30 years a coming off of that support for grief, and with a greater expression probably from males of how they're feeling and crying and all of that. But also, you know, it's so somehow that support has gone. We've become more open, I suppose, to that grief. And you can even see, and I may be stretching it a bit, some of these pandemics which infect the lung. And this current one that's gone from a deep lung problem into a more superficial thing, we call Omicron. That's coming out. That's what Qatar is catharsis. So there's been a catharsis that's coming through. Now, I don't know if that's true. It may be jumping the gun a bit, but I'm seeing it. You know, I wonder if one of the good things that will come out of this is a clearing of old trauma that's coming through. Obviously, it pays a price, and it's been very traumatic for so many people. but I'm seeing that patterning happening. I have him from the deep lung problem into the more superficial one, you know, and hopefully that's a coming out of trauma.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the thought.
Seeing symbology behind it. Yeah. Like the overall progression of the disease from that to that overall has more than just it could have a deeper rooted meaning that represents the global consciousness doing something cathartic to itself.
Yeah. Watch this space. I know. I'm just speculating.
Yeah. No, I think it's an interesting thought. I'm always interested in the symbology behind the progression of these kinds of things. I've heard some mentioned about it in the religious things I watch and listen to, and I find it kind of intriguing, just the different thoughts of the symbolic nature of what this could represent, which things have generally everything is a symbol of something, which a symbol at its root is language, and that conveys information. So you would think the progression of anything would be a narrative, and that narrative would have a rise and a fall, which would follow some sort of rising action that would lead to it. So it seems intuitive to me to think that the narrative structure of reality lies behind even anything like this, a progression of a disease over time, potentially. As wild as that may sound. Additionally, when I think of Renaissance art too, a lot of times, like they capture a lot of the patterns, like Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man and stuff like that. When you see Renaissance art, do you see a connection to it as it relates to the medicine that you engage in?
Yeah, well, I think I'd like to think there's a renaissance happening now, though it's not obvious from our media or Hollywood.
No doubt.
Yeah, I mean, I talked about that in the book. The Renaissance is they went beyond with their imagination and their art. And Leonardo, of course, could show that you could be an artist and a scientist all in one. Which was incredible, you know. And so his science and his design and his mechanistic designs were as fantastic as his artistic portrayal. So you had that with Leonardo. With Shakespeare, you could see the same, a man who could write about Verona and the Far East and Egypt without ever going there, you know. How did that happen? How did that happen? Or, you know, there's a lot of doubt about whether he was one man or what was going on. But, you know, the stories are as relevant now as they were then. There's another kind of sort of patterning, if you like. So yep, I would say Renaissance, a rebirth. I'd like to think, although we've been challenged about this recently in the last 10 years, that there is a growth of consciousness and a growth of awareness. And maybe that's just like that can happen with illness. That can happen with the challenges that we're facing today. I mean, I've had a lot of time to think about that since I wrote the book. Where does this all fit in? We'd like to think consciousness just goes up like this, but it would seem to happen in spirals, and therefore you have to go down and before you come up, and then you go down again, you know. And you go up and you up, and of course it should be in a spiral that goes.
Kind of how you demonstrated it in the book. Chakras and the alignment of the chakras and consciousness kind of spiraling upwards to the crown.
I mean, you could say the big challenge is this of third chakra, which is our personal power, if you like, and the domination of certain people and forces in the world, and how they're sent into the heart, where we're talking about the heart consciousness, which is all engulfing and is the green movement, if you like, but also the battles that go into this just below the chest, if you like. And I explain when that opens and you become a vessel for that, your throat opens, and then somehow you put it together, and then you can see a little bit more. So by speaking your truth, I believe the internet probably in an odd way is helping this. It's helping what we're doing now. We're able to speak our truth, and a few more people will see it. And there were some people, commentators, who will say this is the great challenge for the media and the so-called high priests who felt that they had the ownership of the truth, but there's a new truth that's being developed through the internet. I still have confidence in that, and maybe that's the seat of some of our battles at the moment. Something to be positive about, maybe.
I would have to think so. I mean, there's a lot of positivity overlaid within all of this too. I mean, and as far as our individual worth and our individual meaning and things of that nature, those don't go away with this model. In fact, they become even strengthened, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, spoiler alert, the bottom line with this is that we're in this physical environment. And I suppose we are active. We do good works, well, we hope we do, or works. And that somehow relates back to our consciousness. We feed the consciousness, the field, by doing good stuff. And we can only do good stuff by it. We can do amazing stuff within these parameters of our 3 and 4 dimensions, our time and space and things. We go places. I mean, it is absolutely so. Although we're talking about that there are other fields and there's a consciousness, there's another level, an implicate order, as David Bohm had said to our explicate order, and that's an amazing, wonderful thing. The message must be that this is amazing. This is a miracle that we're here.
Yeah,
and we're able to do this. I feel it feeds back into that consciousness, and that's that cycle we're talking about. So the bottom line is why we're here. It's just to go and do good stuff and physically do good stuff. Yeah,
to work together to make it better. That seems like that description of heaven would be if you were looking at it Judeo-Christianity.
A heaven on earth, so I would like to think, although you can talk esoterically, it actually enriches our physical lives, giving them meaning. So that to me is health enhancing enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you start looking into these Eastern practices, looking into the chakras, what inevitably came for me was this odd experience that I had just subjectively. This may sound off the wall or whatever, but after a while of meditating, after a while of these insights not insights, but intuitions came to me about the nature of reality and these unescapable enigmas of what drove it home for me was this inability to reconcile inorganic, organic matter, living and non-living, and how and where consciousness came about within the rearrangement or the shuffling of this material that is ultimately all uniform and universal. And so I was like, I was looking at flowcharts of what I was trying to put together, and I was like, okay, so we have subatomic particles here. At some point, they split and they became inorganic, non-living matter, and they split and they became biologically organic and viable. At what point does that line get drawn where consciousness appears within the shuffling of these ingredients? And it became inevitably important to me in that phenomena, because DNA provides the instruction manual to piece together this organism. And ultimately what I came to the conclusion that something about consciousness is inherent to DNA and its unique place in the world, so much so that it facilitates the fight against entropic inevitabilities. So DNA is pushing forward complexity against entropy, unlike anything else in the universe. DNA is driving that mechanistic action because, and it's interesting to me that just like the holographic effect, you have all the information. When you see a hologram, information is contained in one spot. The nucleus of a cell has all the DNA necessary to replicate the body. Seeing that fractal nature of reality emerge again within this holographic scope.
And it's a dynamic structure that may be receiving and imparting information because of its spiral structure, which is similar to the chakras. And you say how it could be projecting, and in our way, there's a connection that's there. And I suppose without getting too political, I've thought a lot about, the advances of the last 2 years, and I would hope, and I don't think this is happening, that those who are tampering with our DNA, the CRISPR movement and, the gain of function, have a concept of what they're playing with. And I don't know if they do. I think we're getting too close to things, a bit like the nuclear fission, I suppose. It's got to be handled very delicately, this. And I think it has to handle with the right intent of the people, or else, it'll backfire on us. And I wonder about that being an issue the last 2 years.
Yeah.
It worries me that I would love you to have these discussions with those scientists who are doing this to see if
That's a good idea.
Yeah, but they would. How far would you go? Because I think if you do understand these, or it's not about understanding everything, as I put in my book. It's just being totally in wonder of how little we know and how much there is to explore. And I think if we're dallying with the essence of some of the essence of life, like DNA and RNA, we're without considering all this, we could be in trouble. But let's just hope for some divine intervention for that. That's what I'm putting over. Yeah.
Hopefully human virtue or human understanding at some point becomes humbled enough to understand that maybe there's a lot of knowing and not knowing. I say that a lot because there's a Zen Buddhism. The meditations generally are led with koans, which are old proverbs, like what was your face before your face, things like that, just oddball stuff that help develop and lead to a lot of questions for me, which are really neat. I like koans. And anyways, there's the idea of the beginner's mind that exists in Zen, which is, the whole idea of humbling yourself before pretty much everything, because even the most unknowledgeable, the person you view as being the dumbest in the world, you could learn something from that person, because so that it's that idea of approaching science. Even scientists and physicists who, when I look at the physicists within the realm that are popular, like people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, people like him, when you look at an interview with him on a podcast, which podcasts are a big medium of exchange of ideas now, you see no humbleness. And not to call him out specifically, because he knows a lot more than me. He doesn't have to be humble, and nor has his contributions they're not anything less because of this analysis of his character. For me, I see this overt inability to humble himself before anything. And so I find that stoic mindset, where whenever he converses in conversation, it has to be observed. And if it's not observed in a third person, then it can never be. And at some point, we're going to have to start letting the first person act of observing be something that we take into account when we observe things.
Yeah, I talk a lot about the observed and the observed and the observer being as one. And you can't take away the observer effect in everything, and we have to sort of stand outside that. Yeah, I just totally agree there. They've got a lot to offer, but just the humility that's needed. I mean, I've spent quite a lot of time researching this, and I get humbler and humbler about what I don't know, and that also makes me hesitant to force certain medications on people and the likes, because I know how much we don't know. I know how much I don't know, and it's huge. So but I think that's a reflection of what everybody else knows. So we have to be very, very cautious and humble. But also when you get this close, I think your own intent and compassion has an effect on the outcome too. So once we're getting this close to a conscious reality, our actions and our thoughts, well, we know that from many sort of experiments that have been done, the double slits and the newer versions of that, have a huge effect on the outcome. So we have to approach this stuff now with great humility and compassion, but also, great skill and common sense.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think so as well. I think it almost feels universally intuitive that there'd be this equilibrium of compassion that you demonstrate to the world. It feels like it has to be true, that has an impact on the outcome. And then obviously it's a karmic type relationship to say, well, this happens, that happens, but it's not so simple as that. But it's about the intent. And we're not talking about this is karma, we're saying it in Vogue style. It's deeper than that, and it goes at a different level than that. And so you enact true compassion from the heart that's not driven by egoic gain or display of. It's just like in the Bible and stuff like that. There's things where Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he says, whenever you're fasting, don't make this overtly apparent that you're fasting. Wipe the oil off your face. Don't pray openly in the synagogues. So whenever you do that and you think, oh, I'm going to go pray so I can get this, it's deeper than that. It's not this simple call that you're speaking of, I assume. It's this heartfelt, heart-conscious compassion that once it's implemented into the conscious field, its platonic values become embedded into this cyclical return.
It was interesting when you're saying it's obviously saying Christ was saying don't virtue signal too much, you know. and when he healed somebody,
what does that mean, virtue signaling?
well, virtue signaling means, you know, you're praying to be seen, you know, so you're doing something, you know, so that enriches the.
Okay, so that's the terminology for that phenomenon.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. So
no, you're fine. I've heard it a lot lately, and I wanted to make sure I understood it right before I.
But he was very, you know, and the story of Christ, you know, the parable of Christ, whatever you believe, is you know, so critical. I think, you know, first of all, he got angry with the moneylenders, so he showed that you could be human and getting pissed off with life, you know, that's all right. He also said, you know, this healing was very interesting because there were some people, there was an epileptic person that came to him and he said, "Look, I can't do anything about that, sorry," which was very humbling. And then another person said, "All you have to do is tug my coat." He was sort of giving their secrets away, you know.
Yeah.
You know, so there was, and then also, you know, towards his demise, he got betrayed by his best friend, didn't he, 3 times? And then he got the mob said he should be crucified, and the bureaucrat Pontius Pilate was quite supportive of him. You know, all sorts of vignettes within that story.
Yeah.
You know, whatever religion you come from, there's always these amazing, the story of Buddha and the, you know, Siddhartha and Hermes Siddhartha. They're so enriching, aren't they? Because they're so relevant to pretty well every day that we live.
They're gorgeous. They're absolutely beautiful books. The Bhagavad Gita, the Dhammapada, the Bible. They're unparalleled, really, in their depth. The Bhagavad Gita actually changed my life. I don't say that too softly either. I was what brought me to not to share too much of my story, because I try to tell more of something that separates me from what I'm talking about. But what brought me to all this was just an overt experience of what it felt like an inescapable situation in which my surroundings had become overtly abusive in a relationship thing, and it was traumatic. And I had always viewed myself kind of as somebody who didn't stand up for themselves too well, because I hate confrontation, but I like pleasing people because it leads to less confrontation. Therefore, I get stepped on maybe a little bit, but that's my own agency in that, because not standing up for that had led into an intimate relationship that I've been in, which evolved to that getting overtly stepped on to the point of allowing abuse to occur that I couldn't stop. And that I didn't understand why I was due that abuse either. And it really changed me once I got out of that. I had to go and find out how in the world some person could act that way. And to get over that storyline now, but I was very intrigued by the nature of bad and evil and lack of virtue, the absence of virtue because it was almost like sometimes when the way someone looks at you with a lack of empathy for what you're trying to express to them, when you're expressing all the virtue, all of the heartfeltness you have, and you receive on the receiving end a look in the face that has no reception of that, can change the hard wiring of a person. And it did for me. And it's kind of wild.
Yeah, in the last few years, I've been a similar experience, not within a personal relation, but with a big financial situation that brought us to the brink. But it was at the seat of it was a narcissistic personality. And the way I tried to come to terms with this was to study this, to see that, you know, what were those dynamics that occurred. And again, this is all third chakra stuff, you know, from there. And to really understand it, I've done a series called Goodbye Psychopaths for that reason, a number of which is interesting. So that's where, and it's something that in my book I mentioned, but I hadn't experienced it to that point. So to this extent. Now I see that a huge amount of the people coming to see me have what we call complex post-traumatic stress, which is from the very thing that you're saying, this gaslighting, this somehow insidious, chronic shaming that occurs just in a look, you know, or this is endemic out there, and it is at the seat of so much ill health. This complex narcissistic control, where you or I would become the supply of the narcissist in this sort of way. And it happens not just in people, but it happens in families and organizations and governments and everything. And but I think, like you, through this, I've gained an understanding of this so that I don't fear it so much. I try to, and then I'm sort of integrating it into the whole system. I haven't quite done that yet into that.
It's interesting.
It seems to be, yeah,
complex phenomena. It's already in. Yeah, I didn't realize it. I think I had seen a clip of earlier when I came across of your Goodbye Psychopaths thing,
yeah,
and that captivated me immediately because I was like, I didn't know that that you had spoken on these topics. And of course, I keep it out of my podcast because I'm not here to have a pity party for myself, and I never want that to become the forefront of it. And so I try to briefly cut it in here and there. And it's also, I had agency in creating it, so I'm not putting the blame on anybody else. So before all that would even arise, it was just in a situation where I was being, abused by a person in all kinds of facets, and it rewired my cognitive framework to where everything that I approached within the world, I came up against it, doubting it, questioning it. Is this person lying? Is this situation false? Is my reality inverted? Gaslighting that occurs where somebody tells you a false reality so much that you begin to think it's true. And that happens on a global scale. We're even seeing with Ukraine and Russia, where you look at Putin and he's telling his people the exact thing Russia's doing to Ukraine, but framing it to his people as if Ukraine's doing it to them. You see,
I know. You see the patterns everywhere. Sorry, I'm a jobbing doctor, so my wife's answering the phone, so I apologize for that. So I'm going.
No problem.
It gives us dynamism to our talk. Oh, absolutely. So you see those patterns develop. And it's interesting. It can be somewhat frustrating because you'd want more people to see them, but I also know that they maybe have to experience it, and maybe what we're going through at the moment is an opening, because as you describe, Ethan, and I describe, I gained so much. It was painful, but so much understanding of the human condition. It was the missing. It was missing from my as I said, we were evolving into these loving beings, and then wham, I got hit.
I wouldn't trade it for the world now. The experience was meant to be for a reason. It taught me, it taught, I had to have this missing piece given to, I like to think there's a reason and a narrative structure behind what I do in the world. And I like to, at least if it helps me be better in the world anyways. And so I'd like to think that there was a reason for the downfall, and there's a reason for what I went through. And my reason ultimately is I'm not a doctor, but I would like to try my best to involve myself in some kind of activity that supports those that have or are experiencing this in any way I can. And I've yet to find my niche for that. And I worry too that my story gets involved. And I have been told all my life that everything, or by a lot of people, like I haven't been given very much support, and that's okay. And when that I'm okay with that. I've done the best I can do, whatever, and not the best I can do it multiple times. And there's lots of agency in myself, but I want to keep my story as separate as possible so it doesn't ever come off. So I can get away from this narrative of people saying, well, you're just chasing attention. I'm sick of hearing that because I'm not. And I'm trying to.
But you become very potent. You're the wounded healer.
Yes, I've become big. Yeah.
And it's not as if you don't project that. You're projecting your knowledge. This stuff, okay? And when it comes to helping people, that becomes important. Sometimes you can share it, other times not. But I don't think you can help people without going through it yourself. It's so what you've been through it's very difficult because you want, in some ways, we want to talk to people. We're hurting. We need to do that.
Yeah.
My expression was to try and understand it and do podcasts on it and get through that. Incidentally, I was doing these podcasts and I'd be getting, 30,000 views. But when I turned it into something about humanity, just reconnecting with humanity, and it all went down. So the clickbait from psychopaths, it just taught me, how come everybody's attracted to this? When I stop talking about love and compassion and the human hologram, it shrinks down. So you can increase your, but in the same way, I think it's massive. And I think the complex post-traumatic stress, because we've all got it. We've all inherited it. We've all been part of it. We've all got it to a certain extent, and some more than others. But once you heal from it, you don't forget, and you become that potent healer of other people just by your being. And when I see people heal from this, they become so knowing. And they also regard some of the narcissists, not all of them, as unresolved trauma, which has happened. And that doesn't let them off the hook, because they capitalized on that, you know.
Yeah.
But it also gives the person who's been traumatized and gets it some insights into that. They don't fear them anymore. And a lot of it, you just got to bring them out of your life. But it's not always easy, because that person may be financially controlling you or in a position of power over you.
Yeah.
So somehow we have to disconnect with them and look at them. And one day maybe there's some forgiveness, but I think the forgiveness is for ourselves, right?
Yeah.
For being drawn into this, you know, not
I
blaming
think so.
ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, not blaming ourselves. And I think I actually hear a poet. There's a poet I like who does guided meditations. His name's David White. He's from
Yeah.
Oh yeah, okay. And he has a lot of short like on virtues, like forgiveness. He has a meditation on forgiveness, and I love it. So I listen to it frequently whenever I'm having a hard time, especially with this situation we're talking about. I want to forgive, but I kept getting to the crux of when I thought about this, and I really thought about it, I was like, I can't forgive it. But I was like, no, I can forgive it, but what I can't do is forget it. There's a difference here. And David White says, he talks about it, he develops this ongoing narrative poetically about forgiveness, and ultimately says, you know, maybe it's that which we can't ever forgive, because it has to have that place in us that's unforgiven of that, because it just, we have to wrestle with forgiveness in a way that we can conceptualize it, that we can logically make our lives okay after a traumatic thing. So how do we forgive? Should we forgive? Should we forget? Should we do how do we handle these things? And you want to be ultimately forgiving of everything, because you're going to pass away one day, and everybody wants forgiveness when they die. So you think, okay, I need to force forgiveness, but maybe forgiveness and forgetfulness are separate entities there.
But I think by having that negative, well, the effect of that negativity, still you can access that, makes you very potent when you're talking and helping somebody. There's nothing you would, you know, somebody coming along who says, well, look, I've been through that and I feel great. You know, if you say that to the person, and look what I've done, you know, first of all, it'll be untrue, but secondly, it will piss them off. So I think the way you're going to say, shit, yeah, I felt exactly the same, and parts of me still do, but it's not affecting me to the same extent. It's not dominating me. Somehow, but there are times where I can't move on, and I get triggered because I'm human, you know, and maybe we retain this because we're human, and that's the forgiveness of ourselves. We're not pissed off with ourselves that we got into this situation, which is the gaslighting that's been put on us. That, you know, it's your fault. No wonder this happened to that projection is very common out there. You know, you had it coming to you and all that. How naive, how stupid could you be? You know, and all that. So somehow we get out of that. So out of that shame, but it still hits us when we're tired and knackered. We're going to get it. So you know, what I'd suggest to you is just be yourself, and you'll already become very potent in your helping of people. They don't want perfection. They want to see you. I don't know. Yeah, I just wouldn't want a perfect therapist. You know, that would.
Yeah. I have a great. I
want a human being. You know.
Yeah, and that's ultimately why I kind of recounted this story when we're going back to the whole idea of virtue. And I think people, like you said, people are interested in this phenomena because they get wrapped up in these situations. And the point of this, me recounting that and us having that portion of this dialogue for me was to highlight the nature of human consciousness, and that if encoded within the hologram of consciousness is the nature of virtue, so is the absence of it. And it doesn't excuse the people who act in these ways, and that's not the focal point, is the people acting these ways, but it's the people who have been affected by them, for me, because I still put a lot of agency within the people who act towards others that way. So there's agency in those people, because I haven't had the easiest time, but I don't act like that to people. That's what I don't do. So if there's one thing I don't do that. And so now the primary portion is not to recount my story, but it is to I just have this deep longing to get people out of that situation. And I want to do something with it. This podcast is mostly in the nature of the inquiry of consciousness and looking into all that, but also having psychologists on here and talking about the nature of trauma and what these things do. But it's ultimately getting people out of that situation is what my mission has become in some kind of way. This podcast being a creative endeavor I'm doing, not for fame or fortune or money. It's more for my own fun. I very much enjoy talking about these things. And outside of that is writing books and things. But I hope to someday talk to more people like yourself and to remove people, especially men. And I'm a male, so I can relate to males. It happens to males. And so I hope that I can find my niche there sometime.
Look, you will, and it's interesting because my work has evolved into this work with trauma, and I suppose it's the opposite of gaslighting or what we're doing. It's actually letting that person to rediscover their spark, their joy in life, and that's something that's somehow at certain times of life being denied for them. So so I do believe it's very much linked to the specialness of consciousness, how we're all some individual fractal sparks of consciousness, connected in a way, but all unique, all different, but all unique, and all the same. So this is, and I think you'll embody it, and somehow we have to embody this for it to make sense. I don't think we can preach it. We have to be the change.
That's what I'm trying to do. And absolutely. I think so. Like there's this model of 4E cognition too, which speaks to the act of embodiment and this embodying these virtues, embodying them with your movements, with your actions, what you do in the world becomes the whole at that point. That you work you work closer and closer towards integrating your fractal nature with the whole that draws that in towards the act of being. And though at least it seems, at least platonically, that's kind of what some would say. That there's some psychologists and philosophers that speak in regard to when we act in these ways, we are representing a mirror reflection of what's good, true, and beautiful. And so we work towards that. And there's the Orthodox Christian interpretation of theosis, which the Orthodox interpretation of Christianity is very platonic, and it's a lot less than what the West has pictured it as being this. You say this magic prayer, you go to the kingdom of heaven, you do these things. It's much more different than that. And it's the idea of working to be more virtuous, like Christ was represented to have acted in the Gospels. And as you act in that way and you embody this way of being, you become ultimately more Christ-like, but you never become part of his essence, but you participate in the participatory nature of reality. When you participate, then you're, like you mentioned in your book, I think you mentioned participation in there. And it's this act of participatory nature within the world where we're all working is good, working towards a common goal is good, and as we participate in that, what's good, true, and beautiful, we contribute to being more and more like divine, or what we would consider the divine qualities of reality. And I think it's important, like you said, to not be inertial with and not talk and as much, and do more, embody it more.
Just be the change and then do stuff. We're here to do stuff too. I mean, there are some people that will become a monk or disappear, and that's their role. But for most of it, there's actions speak louder than words, even. And that's when you start really participating in life again. And and I think that's So you're already doing it, Ethan. You're already a teacher. Thanks. You're already reaching people, and so just keep on it. It will organically unfold for you.
Well, I very much appreciate the kind words, and I very much appreciate the conversation. I'm going to proceed further looking into your older podcast, your Goodbye Psychopaths podcast. That's an interesting now. But also I would like to look into the human antenna. So I'll probably have a lot more questions that arise. So hopefully,
I'd love to come back if you have space for me at some stage.
Oh yeah,
we can.
Most certainly I will. So I'll progress further into your works just because I find it intriguing, and I couldn't be more grateful for having you on. But it's getting a little bit past an hour, so I'll let you have your rest of your day back. But thanks so much, Dr. Kelly, for coming on. It means the world to me.
Well, thank you very much, Ethan. It's good. I haven't done one like this for some time because of what's happened in the world, and it's allowed me to reconnect with some of what I've been doing 10 years ago, and now evolving into what's happening. So for me, it's been very useful to reconnect with this.
Well,
It's
well,
got me
that's great.
thinking.
That's
so
great. I'm
you've
glad
provided
you.
a great service to me. Thank you.
Oh, well, no, that means a lot to me too. I'm glad it was bi-directional for sure. I look forward to having you on in the future, and we'll talk soon, Dr. Kelly. Thanks again.
Bless you. Thank you very much.
Bless you.
See you. Bye.
Bye.